Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about breaking up with Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and X, and today, maybe even Google and Amazon and Spotify. On this show, we empower each other to leave any social platforms that aren't serving us, and we do it in a gentle, non-dogmatic, super supportive way. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and when I left Instagram, which was my social media platform of choice back in 2021, I also broke up with Google and Amazon. And back then, I published a blog post called All the Tools I Use to Replace Google, Facebook, and Amazon. And it is now one of the most viewed links on my personal website. So I will put it in the show notes if you want to check back in with what I had to say a few years ago. But today, I am taking inspiration from that blog post along with a lot of new research and 4 more years of lived experience. And I'm sharing with you an episode that I am calling How to Break Up with Google, Amazon, and Spotify. Now, why do I want to break up with those things? Well, the 2-word answer is surveillance capitalism. The slightly longer answer is because my values are not aligned with enriching billionaires like Jeff Bezos or letting Google track my behavior everywhere, both online and, if I'm using Google Maps, offline. And I'm also not into supporting Spotify to pay artists so little and pump my music listening full of royalty-free tracks that they create that aren't even like quote unquote real. I think that there are a lot of reasons to be critical of these companies and their services. And this episode is not really about those reasons. So this is an episode for people who already have a sneaking suspicion or have made a decision that they want to break up with or step back from using the tools that these companies create and are wondering how to do that. This is more of a how-to episode than a why episode, if that makes any sense. And I'm really excited to share it with you, just with that caveat that I'm here to talk about how to do it if you want to do it. Because with Amazon and Google, I am 4 years into the process of not using these platforms. And with Spotify, I've just started that process, but have a lot to share so far. So that's what we'll get into today. Now, if you are a member of the Off the Grid Clubhouse, you got to hear this episode a month ago, and you've already gotten to be a part of the amazing conversation that our Clubhouse members have been having around how we're thinking about these tools, how we want to step back or away from them, and what we're replacing them with in our lives, as well as how that's going, because it doesn't always go super great. Sometimes we set up a tool that kind of flops for us and we have to figure that out together. So I just want to say that if you wish you had gotten access to this early, or at the end, if you listen and you're like, oh, I really could use to talk to some people about it, then I hope you'll come join us in the Clubhouse, because you can ask me those questions there in the comments on Substack. I will reply to you directly. We will figure this out together. And then if you want even more support, I will also be teaching this content as a workshop inside the interweb this summer. So you can head to the show notes to learn about all of the ways that you can get support through your journey, stepping back or away from these giant tech corporations, if that's a path that you want to go on. But for now, I'm super excited to dive in. So what we're going to do today is talk about 3 mindset shifts that I think are necessary for breaking up with Google, Amazon, and or Spotify. And then I'm going to walk you through a very straightforward 5-step process if you've been here for a while, you know I love a 5-step process. We will walk through a 5-step process for how to break up with any of these platforms. And then I will go through each one and kind of use my own experience breaking up with them as an example of how I went about using that process to stop using that tool. Those will be the 3 parts of this episode. I think it's going to be kind of a lot. I mean, this episode is kind of a class that I'm just teaching here for free on the podcast for all of you. You're very welcome. I love you. And again, if you want to support the show or say thank you, you can join the Clubhouse for just $5 a month or pop on the waitlist for the interweb for when I do teach this live, and you can ask a ton of questions. So this is your cue to pull on your swim cap and pop on your goggles, because we are going to dive in to how to break up with Google, Amazon, and Spotify. Okay, so we'll begin with 3 mindset shifts that I think are necessary for breaking up with or stopping using Google, Amazon, or Spotify. The first mindset shift that we have to make is that I think we need to move from desiring perfection to embracing imperfection. Now, this is a much broader mindset shift, right? And many of us grapple with perfectionism in like deep and profound ways. But if you are going to move away from any of these giant tech companies who basically run the internet as we know it these days, you have to, from the first moment that you attempt this, be okay with it not being a perfect process, and be okay with the fact that you can probably never exit any of these platforms 100% entirely if you still intend to use the internet. So Google, Amazon, and Meta, as well as Spotify at this point, make up a majority of our online infrastructure, as well as a big portion of our global economy, right? The tools they've created are ubiquitous, and other tools are built on them. And so if you start on this journey of breaking up with any of these platforms or these companies with the desire to do it perfectly and to never engage with or touch or be a part of anything they're doing ever again, I think you are setting out to fail. Like, we have to recognize that breaking up with, as I put it, any of these companies is going to be an imperfect process, and we may never extricate ourselves entirely. And that is okay. So that's our first mindset shift, embracing imperfection in this process. Our second mindset shift is that we need to reject all-in-one solutions and embrace inconvenience. Part of the appeal of, I think particularly Google and Amazon, is that they take care of so many aspects of our lives in one place. They make everything so convenient, right? Google becomes this place where you can do every single thing you need to do for your job. And you can search for literally any information that you want to know. It will wrap all of that together, and it will serve you ads across the internet based on all of that activity. Amazon will do that as well. Search something on Amazon, you'll start seeing it showing up on your Fire TV and your Echo in your house and all these sorts of things. And Amazon will send you those things right to your doorstep within a few hours. And if you don't like them, you can return them for free and get your money back immediately, right? With Google and Amazon, we have these tools that do everything for us so conveniently. And we have to reject that if we want to step back from these companies. We have to be willing to break up with convenience. The journey of breaking up with Google and Amazon is often that journey, actually, for people. Like, what's underneath it is breaking up with convenience. So we have to be willing to break up with the convenient nature of these all-in-one, straight to our door or immediately on our phone solutions. And we have to embrace inconvenience. Now, as I invite us to embrace inconvenience, I want to be very clear that I am not trying to demonize or critique anyone who still uses these tools or who chooses to use these tools. I understand that with the realities of our lives in late-stage capitalism, many of us need tools like this to just keep going day to day, especially if you are a parent or a person who's living at the intersection of many different marginalized identities and experiences. Like, maybe your Amazon account is what is keeping you fed a lot of days. And I am not here to tell you that that's a bad thing at all. If you're listening to this podcast, I trust you to be in touch with your needs and how you are supporting yourself and serving those needs. And I'm not here to judge any of the decisions that you're making. What I am here to do is help us all break up with these platforms if we want to. And I understand that there is perhaps some privilege inherent in the way that I have been able to step back from all these systems. But I also recognize that because I have that privilege and I am able to step back from these systems, I want to do so. And I want to make that path feel more possible for more people. That doesn't mean it's possible for everyone right now, but I think it is possible for more of us. So that's an important sort of caveat that I'll probably keep circling back to in this episode. But our second mindset shift is rejecting all-in-one solutions and embracing inconvenience. Now, for our third mindset shift, I just want to say a few things about the larger discourse happening this year around consumer advocacy. This year, we have seen many calls for boycotts of companies like Amazon or Target. And I've also seen a lot of critiques of those boycotts. And so I want to be clear here that when I am talking about breaking up with a tool or a company or a platform, I'm not talking about boycotting them. I think that boycotts are strategic political tactics that groups can and even should at times use to assert power over a private company or the relationship between a private company and a government, if we think of the BDS boycotts in relationship to Israel. So I'm a big fan of boycotts. I just don't think a boycott is something that we can individually decide to do when we're hanging out at our house by ourselves. A boycott is a mass movement, or at least a social and community movement. And so what I'm talking about here is not a boycott. I also think in this mindset shift around consumer advocacy, I think it's important when you're going through this process, you don't have to believe that your purchasing choices will change the world or end capitalism to do this. I am not naive. I don't think that my decision to never purchase from Amazon again has changed the world. I'm not under that delusion. But I am motivated to change my behavior to align with my values. I am motivated to step into praxis around this. And I think that that is really important for making these shifts. I don't think you can successfully break up with Google, Amazon, or Spotify because you think you should, or because you think it's going to change the world. I think if you're going through this process, it should be because you want to do the things you believe in. And you realize that Amazon or Google or social media are not things you believe in. And so again, I think that there is a role for consumer advocacy and for boycotts and political movements. And I think those are very important things. And that's not really what I'm talking about here. I am talking about how each of us can decide to live more in alignment with our values, and how not using Amazon or Google or Spotify can be one way that we do that. And I do think that the more of us that do that together, the more possible it feels for even more of us to do it. And I think that that can start to impact the bottom line or revenue of major companies. We're seeing this with Target right now. But I think that where I am operating in this episode is at that personal values and behavior alignment level. So to wrap up our mindset shifts, if you're ready to quit engaging with, honestly, really any corporation and their tools and products, I think the first mindset shift is that we have to embrace imperfection versus desiring a perfect solution. Our second mindset shift is that we have to embrace inconvenience instead of desiring all-in-one solutions that make our lives so convenient there's never any friction at all. And I think the third mindset shift is that we have to change our mind about consumer advocacy and be motivated to change our behavior to align with our values, regardless of how big of an impact we think that might have in the world for other people. So those are our three mindset shifts that I think are really important for going through this process. I think that those are things that we need to be on board with if we want to take on the work of breaking up with these companies. Okay, so we have the mindset shifts. Now let's move into the 5-step process. And maybe before we do that, let's take a deep breath, shall we? We can inhale together and exhale together. And I want to remind you, as I guide you through the overview of this process and then into how I've used it for a few different tools or companies, again, of those mindset shifts, like this is not perfect. This is not convenient. And we have to choose it and believe in it anyway. So let's talk about the process. The first step of breaking up with any tech platform or tool, in my opinion, is to audit how you're using it. I think that everything begins with observation and noticing. So when I was breaking up with Google, I started by making a giant list of everything that I used Google for, and then I could move into the next steps of the process. So that's our first step. Audit how you're using the tool or the company. This might also require a little bit of research into what exactly the company does, because if we're talking about Amazon, we'll very quickly learn that Amazon runs Amazon Web Services, which runs many of the websites on the internet, particularly a lot of US government websites even. So audit how you're using it and maybe do a little bit of research into the other ways this tool might be kind of lurking behind some of the other things that you're doing on or offline. Step 2 is that after your audit, you're going to decide what functionality you need going forward and consider what else you wish you had. So after we've kind of observed what we're using on a particular tool, whether that be Google or Amazon or Spotify or even social media, if you're trying to use this process for social media, we want to look at how we're using it and then go through that list and kind of assess for yourself, like, do I still need this thing? Maybe I'm using Google Docs for stuff, but my Google Docs are actually just like littered with random notes, and I don't really need to keep using that. Or maybe I wish that I had a way to totally mind map and resurface everything that I've randomly put in a Google Doc over the past 10 years. And I wish I had a great second brain system to organize all of those ideas and information. Right? So once you see how you're using the tool, when you've done our audit in step 1, in step 2, you decide what functionality do you need and what else do you wish you had? Because I think that one of the things that happens when we get sort of sucked into these all-in-one services, I think particularly like Google, is that we just start to do the things they tell us to do, or we start to conceive of what's possible based on the tool itself instead of like, wait, this is actually what would serve me the best. Can I go out and find a tool that will do that? That is a different way of thinking than being like, okay, well, Google Docs is here, so I'll just keep using this way. So that's our second step. Our third step of the process is going to be setting a priority for what matters most for you in an alternative. So let me explain what I mean by this. When you are breaking up with Google, Amazon, Spotify, Meta, whatever it may be, there will be a lot of different alternate options for tools that you can use to do the things you want to do on or offline. And when you start to consider those options, I think it's important to know what is most important to you. So when I was leaving Gmail, for instance, I really wanted an email service that had a lot of privacy functionality. I was freaked out that Google was reading my emails, and I wanted an email service that was not going to do that. And so I prioritized privacy in my search for Gmail alternates. And I think that that guided me directly to the tool I chose, which was ProtonMail, because they are known for being a privacy-first email service provider. Now, on the contrary, when I was setting up my business, I decided that actually what I wanted was inexpensive email where I could just have an email address at softersounds.studio. I was less concerned with privacy in my business than my personal life. I don't know if that's still true, but it was at the time. So I set up my business email in Zoho Mail, which is not privacy focused, but cost me, I think, like $8 a year when I was starting out. So my priority there was price. Your priority could also be product. Like maybe you have some very specific things that you need a tool to do. And so your priority is choosing the product or the tool that will do exactly those things. Or maybe you have some values aligned pieces. You're like, I really want something that's open source, or I only want to have a tool for this where the company is a co-op or the company is not VC funded. So the priorities can kind of be anything. I would recommend starting with those kind of 3 Ps I've just pulled out: privacy, price, or product. And then when you have your priority, are you most focused on privacy, on price, or on product? Then we move to step 4, which is finding alternate tools. This is where we start to problem solve around, we had that list of, okay, here's all the ways I'm using this tool or this company's tools. Here's the functionality I want going forward. And here's my priority. And when we can see all of that, we're actually very ready to start searching for tools and kind of considering, okay, this one meets these things that I want, but not this. This one does this. Oh, great. This one does everything. Maybe I'll go with that tool. Or you're like, oh, this one does everything, but it costs $1 million and my priority is price. So I'm going to have to piece together a few different tools to have the most inexpensive solution. When we're looking for our other tools, that's where like the functionality and the priority really starts to come together as we move toward making a decision. And then step 5 of this process is we just pick another tool and try it for a while. We have to remember that this is an experiment. And so as frustrating as it can be to change tools or to try out something new and then not like it and be like, oh, I have to change again, I think that it's really important that we bring that experimental mindset into the process. And I think that we will have more success in our experiments if we move through all of these steps. Something I have seen happen for people is they may decide like, oh, I want to get away from Gmail. And then they like Google email platforms, pick the first one that comes up, try to set up their whole email system in that thing. It doesn't really work. They flame out. They go right back to Gmail, right? I think that when we're operating sort of haphazardly or just on impulse with these like major systems in our life, like email, it can lead to a lot of frustration and it can make our experiments feel very haphazard and often fail. But if we can take a more intentional approach, then I think we're more likely to select a tool that meets our needs better the first or second time, and we'll be better able to kind of stick with and commit to our decision to move away from the company that we're trying to break up with. So that is our 5-step process. Step 1, audit how you're using the tool or the company's tools. Step 2, decide what functionality you need going forward and consider what else you wish you had that maybe that tool isn't even giving you now. Step 3 is set a priority. Do you care the most about privacy, price, product, or something else? Step 4 is find alternate tools, make a list of all the other options, start to consider them based on functionality and priority. And step 5 is to select one and try it out as an experiment. Those are our 5 steps. It is deceptively simple when I lay it out that way, but we will now move into some of the examples that get into like the layers of complication as we do this. So let's move on to talking about how I broke up with Google. We'll start there, and then I'll move into Amazon and Spotify. So when I broke up with Google and I started to audit how I was using Google, I was using it for so much. Like, that's what I very quickly realized. I used Google for Gmail. I used it for Google Calendar. I used Google Docs. I used Google Sheets. I used Google Slides. I used Google Drive. I used Google Search. I used Google Chrome. I used Google Maps. Like, Google had infiltrated so many areas of my life, right? Like, it had all my emails. It mapped my routes everywhere I wanted to go. It saw every search I ever did on the internet. It saw all of my internet browsing through Google Chrome. And I had built a lot of my like work systems when I was freelancing at the time into Google Drive and Docs and Sheets and things. So breaking up with Google for me was a multi-step process, divesting from so many of the tools that I was using on Google. Now, I've already mentioned that my first step, I believe, was getting out of Gmail. So I moved my email to Proton Mail and I set up a new email address there. And then over the next few months, I did 2 things. I started unsubscribing from every newsletter that I was subscribed to with my Gmail, and if I wanted to, resubscribing with my new email address. And then I started going through my password manager to change all of my logins from my Gmail to that new email address. And that took a lot of time. And some of them have still never changed. Sometimes companies will not let you change your email address in their system. And so my Gmail address still exists. It is there. And for a year after I moved, I had an autoresponder that was like, I no longer use this address. Please email me at this new address. And then eventually I took that down because nobody was really emailing me through Gmail anymore. But my Gmail account does still exist. So I want to be clear. I didn't break up with Google, like fully delete myself. I just don't use that account anymore. And I use my Proton Mail account. But it's still there for the very random, I would say like once a year, maybe at this point, there is some verification code or something that goes to that inbox that I have to go dig out and find. So that's where I started though with Gmail. Then I went to Google Calendar. Now, I found the calendar options to be some of the like least exciting in terms of choosing an alternate solution. And so I chose to just move from Google Calendar to iCal. So I do have a MacBook and an iPhone, and I'm very set up in the Apple system. And so some of my switches from Google were just to move to Apple tools. And I don't think Apple is perfect either. I often refer to it as just like choosing like a different capitalist daddy. Although I will say that there is perhaps some evidence that Apple has more privacy protections in place, or they have at least like built and publicized more of their privacy features. And so I did feel like I was at least gaining some privacy by moving away from Google and toward Apple. So I replaced Google Calendar with iCal, and I exported all of my Google Calendar events and moved them into iCal. Now, when I did this, what I did not realize is that when I imported all of that into iCal, apparently it sent calendar invites for all of my past events. And so definitely some people in my life that I no longer speak to got invitations to old events that things we had done together years ago. And that was like not the most fun moment for me. So I don't know if it still does that, but now I would not just move the calendar. I would just start fresh in iCal. But, like I said, this is an experiment. That was a mistake, I guess, that I made. And like, it was a little embarrassing, but also it was fine. Speaking of moving into the Apple universe, I also replaced Google Maps with Apple Maps, which I moved to. And I've used Apple Maps for a few years now. And actually, I had to download Google Maps for something very recently. And what I immediately noticed is all of the brands that the maps will like feature in these little like pop-up flags. And I assume that those brands are like paying for more visible features in Google. And I was like fascinated by this because I'm not seeing that in Apple Maps at this point. And it was such a like stark reminder of like, oh yeah, the purpose here is like make more money, not like help me find fun, cool things. So anyway, I moved most of the things that I was doing in like a Google Docs, Drive, Sheets, Slides into Notion. And so Notion is my preferred tool for organizing almost every aspect of my business. And then I combine that with other things like Canva for the more visual things I was doing in Google Slides. I have a lot of my file storage in Dropbox. And then the other big switch that I had to make upon exiting Google was to get out of Google Chrome and Google Search. Now, I found that replacing Google Chrome with the Brave browser was like a very easy switch for me. It is built on Chromium, which is sort of like the infrastructure of Google Chrome, but it doesn't report everything back to Google. And Brave is actually a privacy-focused browser. So as I was prioritizing privacy with Gmail, I was also prioritizing it with the switch for my browser, and so I selected to move to Brave. Firefox is also an amazing option, and I used Firefox for a while, but I found that a lot of the browser extensions I like to use were Chrome only. So they only work on browsers built on Chromium, and so it became this sort of sticking point for me where I was like, I don't like being in Firefox because I can't use some of these extensions I really like, and so I had to find another browser. So again, this is another experiment. Like I went to Firefox for a while, it wasn't the right fit for me, had to find something else. Similarly, when I first broke up with Google, I started using the search engine DuckDuckGo because that's a privacy-focused search engine. And I still try to use DuckDuckGo in my personal life for searches, but in my business, where I'm often optimizing for SEO and trying to like learn how SEO works, SEO is based around Google search. Like that is just the case. That is what people are optimizing for because Google is the most used search engine. And so I found that in my business, I just wasn't getting the most relevant or pertinent search results. And I was having trouble understanding what made different things surface for Google when I wasn't using Google search. So now I have two different profiles set up on my computer in my internet browser. One is for my business and one is for my personal life. And on the business one, Google search is my standard search engine. And in the personal one, DuckDuckGo is the search engine. And so that's one way where, again, like privacy is my priority, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice like the functionality I needed in my my business context to quit using Google search, which takes us back to our first mindset shift, right? Embracing imperfection. This is not perfect, and I'm having to figure out my way forward anyway. So that is a very quick overview of how I went through this process with Google. I audited how I was using all of these different Google services. I decided what functionality I needed going forward, and I set some priorities. You'll notice that different tools had different priorities, right? Some places I really wanted to focus on privacy. Other places I was more concerned about price or about specific functionality. Then I had to find alternate tools and experiment with using those. You'll also see that this definitely required rejecting all-in-one solutions, right? I used to do all of those things with Google, and now I use like 8 different tools to replace the things I was just doing through Google. And at this stage, years later, I don't find that inconvenient at all. But I think this does become a big block for the people that I'm talking to who are using Google for a lot right now and want to look at moving away, but are realizing just how many other tools they will have to figure out or find to make those switches. And so, again, there's no perfect way to do this. It does require embracing some inconvenience. And maybe Google isn't where you start, right? If you're like, I want to make some of these shifts, but I am so deeply embedded in Google, you don't have to start with that one. That's just one of the ones I picked to begin with. So that was my process with Google. And I'm just realizing I didn't even talk about YouTube, which is a whole other can of worms that we can open up together in the Clubhouse or the interweb when we circle back to this topic. But for now, let's talk about Amazon. So when I audited how I was using Amazon, what I noticed was I had an Amazon Prime account. I was doing a lot of searching for products and buying things on Amazon. I was watching movies and shows on Amazon Prime Video, and I was using Goodreads to track my reading, which is owned by Amazon. The more research I did on Amazon, I also realized that, as I said before, many of the websites I use are sort of built on Amazon Web Services infrastructure, or they host all of the assets of their website, like all the images, all the fonts, all the everything on Amazon Web Services. So when I decided to break up with Amazon, at the very outset, I had to embrace imperfection because I was like, I am not committed to not using any website that works with Amazon Web Services. Like, I work online. I have to be able to use the internet. And that was like a degree of inconvenience that didn't feel like inconvenience. It actually just felt like it would be a complete and total block to doing my job online or having my business online. And so I chose having an online business over breaking up with Amazon Web Services. That was a decision I made and one I continued to make. That said, I pretty quickly knew that I wanted to stop buying things on Amazon. And I was like, I am not interested in continuing to shop here. So I canceled my Amazon Prime account and I moved to buying things directly from retailers and often just paying them for shipping. The free shipping aspect of Amazon Prime was really one of my biggest hooks there. And I just kind of had to have an affirmation for myself that it's okay to pay for shipping every time I would buy something online. That also got me going back to shopping in person much more than I had been. So I stopped using Amazon Prime. I stopped making purchases of physical products on Amazon, and I switched that to either buying from a retailer directly online or buying from a store in the city where I live. And that was like the biggest Amazon-related switch that I made. Now, a switch I have not made is that I still read ebooks with a Kindle, which is owned by Amazon. My decision there came from the place of like, I already own this Kindle. It works perfectly well. I don't intend to throw it away to get something that feels more aligned with my values. I don't think I would buy another Kindle from Amazon. Once this one dies or breaks, I think I will move to a different device, probably a Kobe or a Nook from Barnes & Noble. But because I already own the device, it felt like keeping that made more sense. I also occasionally do buy ebooks from Amazon, particularly from indie authors who are only distributing through Amazon. And so I will go purchase their books on Amazon so they go directly to my Kindle and I'm supporting that author to some extent. But I'm also making some really big decisions around my book in relationship to Amazon, and I don't think I'm going to put it on Amazon. So I am really willing to inconvenience myself in that way, even while in other ways I want to support authors who are choosing to be there, right? So sometimes my priority is support independent artists. That is going to come up when we talk about Spotify in a moment. That is a really high priority for me and something I've set as a priority for this year, like in every area of my life. So sometimes supporting independent artists means buying their book in the Kindle store on Amazon. And because that's my priority, I do that, even though Amazon is a company I've done my best to break up with. Again, it's all an experiment. It's imperfect. We embrace inconvenience in some ways, and we have different priorities in other ways. So nothing is perfect here. And I will say that I have on occasion made purchases on Amazon when there were small companies who only fulfilled through Amazon. I do understand that for a lot of product-based and retail businesses, Amazon is one of the most affordable and realistic retail spaces for them. And I get that. And I'm not de facto not purchasing from those companies because they're using Amazon. Because again, supporting independent artists, supporting small businesses is my higher priority than rejecting or refusing Amazon. But that's on a case-by-case basis. So that is kind of my Amazon journey. Now, let's talk a little bit about Spotify to wrap up this episode. So if you don't know much about my background, I used to be a community radio DJ in Chicago. I had a live on-air morning drive time show on Tuesday mornings for years. And I love independent artists and musicians. I love local music. I love live music. And when I worked at the radio station, I was just immersed in that all of the time. And so when musicians started talking about how much Spotify ripped them off, I was paying attention. And I paid attention for years while still listening on Spotify. And for a while, I was buying their albums anyway. And then I noticed that Spotify totally took over my listening. And then at the end of last year, Liz Pelly, who is a prominent music critic, published a book called Mood Machine: The Rise of Spotify and the Costs of the Perfect Playlist. And in publishing this book and doing press around it, a lot of people that I pay attention to started having conversations around the role that Spotify is playing in our lives. And I had a conversation with my friend, Taylor Elise Morrison, on our monthly podcast, Thought of You, where we talked about listening to the guys on Vibe Check talk about Spotify, reading this article and then book from Liz Pelly talking about Spotify and how it might change our relationship to this app. And I decided that if I wanted to support independent artists, the best thing I could do would be to move my listening away from Spotify, because Spotify pays artists so little per stream, and there are easily available other music listening services that just pay more per stream. So at the start of this year, I moved all of my music listening from Spotify to Apple Music. I used an app to transfer all my playlists, which there were so many, thousands of songs. It was a huge process. And I started listening to music exclusively on Apple Music, hoping that by streaming there, artists would earn a few more pennies or maybe even dollars from me each year. The other thing I did is I started just buying albums on Bandcamp. I noticed that if I was listening to something all the way through more than once or twice, I committed to just buying the album, spending the $10 on Bandcamp to buy it. Now, I've gotten a little bit away from how the process worked for me here, but essentially, with this one, I didn't really have to audit how I was using Spotify so much because I knew I was using it to make playlists and listen to music. And I knew the functionality I wanted from something else was to make playlists and listen to music. And I set a priority of supporting independent artists. How can I get the most money to artists when I'm listening to their music? And I looked up the alternate tools and I selected Apple Music and purchasing from Bandcamp and made that shift in that decision. Now, I've also talked a bit with Taylor in the subsequent episodes about how it has changed my relationship to music this year. I have realized that Spotify provided a lot of music discovery for me. And it was always reminding me that there were new albums by artists that maybe I listened to a few years ago, and they would sort of bring that forward for me. And Apple Music is not doing that for me at this point. And so it's putting the impetus on me again to seek out new music and to be putting in the work to find and curate the music that I listen to. And sometimes that feels like a fun adventure. And sometimes I'm tired, and I have noticed that I am listening to less new music this year, I think, than I have in the past when Spotify was just kind of serving it up to me. And I've just decided to be okay with that. Also, because a lot of the new music Spotify was serving me was sort of just algorithmically curated and at times even Spotify created and produced music that I don't necessarily care about. Or I noticed that a lot of my listening had turned into knowing one random song by a bunch of artists, whereas now on Apple Music, I'm doing a lot more listening to albums because maybe I bought it on Bandcamp and it's the one that I've been pressing play on lately, and so I've heard it over and over. And I like being more focused on albums than singles again. I think that that's just been a fun shift for me this year. And all of that said, I still have a Spotify premium account because through Softer Sounds, I need access to Spotify without ads to make sure that clients' podcast stuff is all working properly. So this is another instance where I'm still giving Spotify money, but because of my commitment to trying to get more of my money to independent artists, I've changed my behavior to be aligned with that value and that priority. And it has changed my relationship to music to some extent, but I'm trying to embrace that and figure out what it might mean for me a year from now, right? I'm only 4 months into this experiment. And there have been times when I've been like, oh, I just want to go back to Spotify. But I still feel committed overall to making this broader shift in my life and my relationship to music. And I'm embracing the imperfection and the inconvenience of that. So, my dear listener, should we take another deep breath? I feel like I just went through a lot. Let's inhale together and exhale together. I'm so curious how you are feeling having listened to this episode. Do you feel inspired and ready to go audit what you're doing with all these companies, figuring out what tools you need to replace, setting your priorities, finding alternates, doing your experiments? Are you like, yes, 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 I am all for it? Or are you perhaps getting to the end of this episode feeling a little bit like, wow, that feels like a lot of work, and I don't know if I'm up for that right now? I know it's been a hard year. I know that there are so many horrifying and challenging things happening in the world. I've experienced some of them in my personal life. I've witnessed many of them on a national or global scale, like many of us have. And I think for me, making these changes in my personal life feels empowering and helps me feel and see the ways that I can change my life and change my world. I often say I can't change the world, but I can change my world. And stopping using Google, Amazon, Spotify, social media to the extent that I can is a way that I've changed my world pretty radically over the past 4 or 5 years. My life now looks very different than it did when I was using all of these tools daily. I mean, there was definitely a period in my life, 2017, 2018, 2019 even, where I was using Amazon, Google, Instagram, and Spotify every single day. And now I don't use any of those. I mean, occasionally, as I've said here, right? Like I will listen to a podcast on Spotify if I need to, or make a Google search, or find a ebook on Amazon. But I think the biggest difference for me is that those things no longer make up like the infrastructure of my brain or my internet or my daily life. And so when I engage with them, they feel like external tools that like, if I really need something and it feels the values aligned to go there for it, I will. But the options I choose on the day to day are just so different than they used to be. And they feel so much more aligned with the things I want to choose. They don't feel like things I have to choose because this is how we do things. They feel like the choices I'm actively making. And those choices, I imagine, will be different than the ones you might actively be making. And again, I am in full support of that. I want all of us to get free, and I don't think that means that we all do the same things on that journey. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Just to recap real quick, in our 45 minutes together, we have talked about the 3 mindset shifts that I think that you need to make if you want to move away from these giant tech companies and all of their tools. We've talked about the 5-step process that I've offered for auditing how you use the tools, deciding the functionality you need, setting your priorities, finding alternates, doing experiments. And then I walked you through how I used that process to break up with Google, Amazon, and Spotify for myself in my own life, and how imperfect and inconvenient all of that was, right? Those mindset shifts are the ones that I had to make and still make all the time in this process and in continuing to commit to not using these tools. If this episode really has your wheels turning and you're like, I want to figure this out for myself, I will definitely say it's easier to do that if you're doing it with other people. So I would love to see you in the Clubhouse. Like I shared at the beginning, this episode went live there a month ago, and we've been having a great conversation around how to do all these things. So you can head there right now, and for just $5, you can pop right into our comment thread about that and ask me questions and ask other Clubhouse members questions, and we can figure it out together. Or if you're feeling a bit more like, I want to let this sink in, and then I want to return to it in like a month or so and start really taking the steps toward these things. I will also be hosting a workshop all around this in the interweb this summer. So you can head to the show notes, jump on the interweb waitlist to learn more about that. And if you've tuned into this whole episode and you're like, well, that was cool, but I'm not breaking up with any of this stuff. That's great too. I'm grateful that you're here. I appreciate your time. And I just want to say that I love making this show for all of us and our many different experiences of our lives and our businesses. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really